Hey y'all! It's entry number 22 of this offseason series where we discuss a different player's fantasy value each day as a group. We are another day closer to the start of the 2022 NFL season. Each day we'll drop a name, go through some positives and some concerns of their fantasy profile, and then I'll give my personal opinion at the end. Today's discussion will be on Kyler Murray, quarterback, Arizona Cardinals. We'll start with the positives with Kyler Murray's fantasy profile. To start, we have to talk about his rushing upside. Over the course of his 3-year career of 46 games, Kyler Murray has averaged 6.83 carries, 38.8 rushing yards, and 0.43 rushing touchdowns per game, according to Pro Football Reference. He has one of the higher rushing ceilings in the league, which raises his fantasy potential in 2022. Next up for positives with Kyler Murray's fantasy profile is that he's reunited with his college teammate, Marquise Brown. The Arizona Cardinals made a trade to acquire Marquise Hollywood Brown this offseason, giving up a first-round pick in the process. Brown and Kyler Murray played together at Oklahoma during the 2018 college football season and enjoyed a lot of success, with Brown catching 75 passes for 1,318 receiving yards and 10 receiving touchdowns, and Murray completing 260 passes on 377 passing attempts for 4,361 passing yards and 42 passing touchdowns according to Sports Reference. They clearly have some past chemistry, and Kyler Murray should benefit from this acquisition. The third thing I really liked about Kyler Murray's fantasy profile this year is his 2021 passing accuracy. Kyler Murray showed some excellent passing accuracy during the 2021 season, completing 69.2% of his passes overall. He had an on-target percentage of 79.4% during the 2021 season, which ranked as the 6th best in the NFL according to Pro Football Reference. In addition, Murray had a 50% deep ball completion percentage, which ranked first, a 76.4 true completion percentage, and 45 money throws, which ranked first during the 2021 season, according to Player Profiler. If he can keep up this accuracy as a passer, it will help increase Kyler Murray's fantasy upside. Moving on to some of the concerns with Kyler Murray's fantasy profile. To start, we have to talk about the DeAndre Hopkins suspension, as well as losing Christian Kirk this offseason. One of Kyler Murray's favorite weapons over the past couple of seasons has been DeAndre Hopkins, but he will have to play without Hopkins for the first 6 games of the NFL season, after Hopkins got suspended for violating the PED policy. One of his other favorite weapons over the past few years, Christian Kirk, is also gone this offseason after he signed a lucrative deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars, to say the least. Not having a couple of his best weapons for at least the first third of the year in Hopkins' case could impact Kyler Murray's play early on. Next up on the concerns list for Kyler Murray's fantasy profile is his smaller stature and the injuries in the second half of the last couple of seasons. Kyler Murray is the smallest starting quarterback in the NFL, standing at 5'10" and weighing a shade over 200 pounds. Given his stature, you worry a little more about Kyler's body holding up over the course of an entire season compared to other quarterbacks. He's had injuries down the stretch that have caused his play to dip in the second half of the year in each of the last 2 seasons. If you're drafting him, this means that in fantasy playoff times your team might struggle because Murray isn't performing at the levels that we're used to. The third concern I have with Kyler Murray's fantasy profile in 2022 is that he's got an older offensive line. The Arizona Cardinals offensive line ranked 15th at the end of last season, according to Pro Football Focus. In 2022, they are slated to have 4 of the 5 same starters from the 2021 season, with the only change happening at right guard as they go from Josh Jones to Will Hernandez. But the average age of the starting offensive line will be over 30 come week 1. If any of these guys regress with age, it could spell trouble for Kyler Murray and lead to more pressure and sacks. Some additional thoughts on Kyler Murray. In terms of total fantasy points, Kyler Murray finished as the QB10 with 310.5 total fantasy points, or 22.2 fantasy points per game, in standard formats during the 2021 season, according to Fantasy Pros. During the 2020 NFL season, Kyler Murray finished as the QB2 in total fantasy points with 390.7 total fantasy points and 24.4 fantasy points per game, according to Fantasy Pros. During the 2021 NFL season, Kyler Murray had 1 out of 14 games where he scored between 0 and 10 fantasy points, 2 out of 14 games where he scored between 10 and 15 fantasy points, 3 out of 14 games where he scored between 15 and 20 fantasy points, 4 out of 14 games where he scored between 20 and 25 fantasy points, 1 out of 14 games where he scored between 25 and 30 fantasy points, and 3 out of 14 games where he scored over 30 fantasy points according to fantasy data. Personal opinion. Kyler Murray is going off the board as QB5, about pick 67 overall, on ESPN, and QB6, about pick 58 overall, on Yahoo. This seems like an appropriate range for him. I have him at QB5 right now. He's proven over the last couple of seasons that he's an upper half QB1 in fantasy with his rushing upside. Quarterback is a position where you really have to know your league's tendencies for fantasy drafts, since how early they go varies a lot from league to league. In more casual leagues, they'll typically fly off the board like crazy early on. But in leagues where a majority of the players believe in the popular saying, "Always wait on a quarterback," the top guys can actually become phenomenal values. For a quarterback, I would say Murray is a solid value at his ADP, considering he's going in the late 5th, early 6th round of most leagues, and has been a top 3 fantasy quarterback fairly recently. I'm not reaching for him, but if you play in more of a always wait on a quarterback type of league, where quarterbacks go later than their ADP would indicate, he's a pretty good value. For each of these entries, we will highlight a charitable cause or organization. Kyler Murray has donated $25,000 to the charity Gen Youth to help feed children affected by school closings. Here's a link to that organization below. And that's it for today's entry. If you have a player that you'd like to see featured on the Player Days video series, drop a comment below.